Hello and welcome to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers play games from the past and discuss their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo, and I'm joined, as always, by a man who still wakes up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat yelling, "Blue pages!"
Brett Duville.
I figured you'd know when to come in. When I saw that video, oh man, just a lot of memories rushing back on that one.
Yeah, I remember being thoroughly creeped out by that whole thing.
We are, of course, talking about the video game MYST, classic HyperCard adventure game that we will. That's the start of that series. So
it was a pretty long running series as well. So it's I don't know that they worked on all of the MYST games. I'm pretty certain they didn't.
I think they left for a time.
Yeah. And I think Ubisoft maybe had a hand in some of it because they were their publisher towards the end of the MYST stuff.
That's a good question.
And,
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that's true. And they've done, they've done various editions of the game since, on different platforms. You're playing on iOS, for example. You can play Riven on iPad or iPhone. It's kind of interesting to see that. I wasn't aware of that prior to tonight.
Yeah, I usually try to play on the original platform, but for whatever reason this time there was some sort of novelty in me playing this game that I have played probably a few times and spent a lot of time bashing my head against. Playing it on my phone or my iPad is just sort of funny to me. So yeah, I thought, well, I mean, it's just kind of a pixel hunting kind of just click the screen kind of game. So it felt like it would work fine. Yeah.
I would think that it would. Yeah. On the PC, the version I'm playing is actually a Scum VM game, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I guess Scum VM has branched out to support other adventure games other than just Scum games. I think I knew that it was just an adventure game runner sort of thing. But I believe I saw that in the credits at the beginning. It's pretty wild to see that. We should set the table a little bit. This game came out in September of 1993, and we'll talk a little bit about why that timing was particularly good for them. But let's first hit some of the other games from that year. It's a pretty good list, and I think only one that we've played before. Is that true? Day of the Tentacle? I believe that's the only one we've played.
Yeah, I think so. Year. Yeah. Day of the Tentacle, Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. We missed Kirby's Adventure was one that we didn't talk about in pre-show. X-Wing, which we did play TIE Fighter, but we didn't play its predecessor, X-Wing. Seventh Guest, which we will come back to, I think, in the discussion, because there was a sort of rivalry between these two games for obvious reasons that we'll talk more about. Syndicate, we talked sort of about the sort of isometric type RPG genre from time to time, and so some of the early ones. We also missed talking about Master of Orion in pre-show. Sam & Max Hit the Road, Gabriel Knight.
Sins of the Father.
Sins of the Father. So a lot of adventure games. Doom,
Sam & Max. You said that.
Critical. Sam & Max Hit the Road. Yep. And then Mega Man X, just to name a few.
Star Fox and Disney's Aladdin were other ones that you had pointed out in pre-show. An interesting year. There's the Nintendo, the SNES was going, full strength. Plenty of good games for that. I don't really know where Sega was. I mean, there's still games coming out for it at the time, so I guess the Genesis was still going strong, and of course the PC. So that was kind of the big three at the time.
Yeah, there is on this page, they do mention some arcade games too, which is we don't usually talk about, but Mortal Kombat 2 is big, Samurai Showdown, a lot of fighting games, Virtua Fighter, NBA Jam. So it's interesting to think about that. Arcades still having some pretty critical games coming out in '93.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
yeah, they weren't quite gone, but they were going.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, especially with the SNES doing as well as it was doing. But yeah, I think one of the themes with this list that we mentioned is really just how still semi-dominant adventure games were at the time. And because we played, Day of the Tentacle at this same year, earlier in the year, it came out in June. And we had guests on for that. We definitely talked a fair amount about sort of the arc of the adventure game and where it had been and where it was going, and then sort of as it's progressing into the future. And MYST is an interesting one to land sort of in the middle of that. One of the reasons we played Day of the Tentacle is from the sort of LucasArts formula, if you will. It was really one of the good kind of pinnacle examples of the formula for them. And so it was a good one to play early on to talk about that. But if you look at this year in particular, and we've also played some Sierra games in the form of King's Quest and Space Quest. But then on this list, you have Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, which is, sort of the natural progression of the Sierra games that you can see.
Yeah, how the Leisure Suit Larry game also came out this year. So,
oh, okay, I missed that.
6. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, okay, yep. Fair enough. Good old Leisure Suit Larry. But they still you could tell a Sierra game from a LucasArts game. Still in this time. Because there's still Gabriel Knight had some innovations to my memory, but it still sort of had a similar feel about it and core design. But then you have these two games that come out this year that had I think a pretty big impact on adventure games in general for various reasons. Seventh Guest and MYST. And then the other thing, which maybe Brett can jump in and give some more color to, is that one of the other critical things that happen when it comes to key games to come out on sort of an emerging platform, and that's CD-ROM,
right,
or an emerging technology. So that allowed Seventh Guest, MYST, and Doom probably to really start shining.
Doom would have fit on floppies. In fact, that's how I got my copy, as I recall. So that was possible. Multiple floppies. I mean, this was definitely a time when you were getting a bunch of floppies, and they basically had a zip archive across multiple disks or something like that had to be stitched together, or just you had to switch the disks out as you play it or something like that. Typically, you were installing to the hard drive, and so you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't be switching all that much. But yeah, this was the perfect time to come out for a game like this, because not only were CD-ROMs fairly new to market and now being packaged with PCs, typically by OEM, was it something equipment manufacturers?
Yeah, I always forget what OEM means. Even
original? I can't. It's not original. That wouldn't make any sense. Anyway, what OEM stands for. But they were trying to find a way to justify why you needed one of these things. And games like MYST and The Seventh Guest, which are very attractive, beautiful games for the time, very different from anything else on the list that we read in terms of look. MYST in particular, with its I think very strikingly pre-rendered look. Just way higher detail than anything else was, and the idea that this was what you're gonna be able to have if you move to a CD-ROM, that this is what games are going to look like, was a strong selling point for them. I know I got my copy of MYST. I didn't buy MYST itself. I actually got it as a pack in I believe '94. With my hard drive. And that was also a huge part of how why they managed to be the strongest selling PC title to that date. And they held that title for almost a decade until The Sims 2 beat them in 2002. So
it's original equipment manufacturer. Yes, it
is original equipment. Okay,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. That's weird because it's like you're building it from parts and stuff like that. Weird title for that. That's why it always sounds strange to me.
Yeah.
I always doubt it. I'm like, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this was a way to drive. I think the popularity and a lot of the sales were in those pack-in deals, and that, it's fine for them. You got plenty of copies of MYST out there. We should say a little bit about the developer, which was Cyan Inc. or Cyan Worlds Inc. They're referred to both ways. It was founded by the Miller brothers, Rand and Robin, in 1987, and they had previously focused on the adventure game for children market using HyperCard. HyperCard was a sort of development environment that shipped with Macs. They worked on Macs. I at one time knew what 3D software they used, but I don't remember now. It's been so long.
I actually had made a note to look that up and then didn't do that. But continue talking. I'll see if I can.
Yeah, no, it was, and what was kind of great about it was the HyperCard environment allowed the two of them to be able to work on things together. One of them's more of an artist. That would be Robin, I believe, and Rand being more of the programmer and did the scripting that was involved in HyperCard. So HyperCard was sort of like what it sounds like, was a way of sort of linking pages together like HTML does, and hence the hyper for hyperlink, I assume. So it's very, very kind of similar to web technology, which was also kind of coming into its own at the time.
QuickTime as well, yeah.
Yeah, and QuickTime, as a thing that they could embed. That's where we get those little movies. Of course, they had to rewrite all of that for Windows to ship on PC platforms, and they did that. I think Broderbund actually had done that work. Broderbund was the publisher, and they didn't last too much longer than this. I think they were around another 5 years maybe after MYST. And at that point, Cyan was, had to move to different publishers and things like that. But they're still around, as we were talking about in pre-show. They came out with a game just a few years ago, and of course, they've been shepherding the MYST IP onto things like iPhones and et cetera. I believe they have the rights to all the games now, and so it's all back with them, so they can continue to bring it to new players, new generations of players. So
looks like Stratavision 3D they used.
Okay.
And then some Macromedia had a macro model app of some kind that they used with some Photoshop additions. But yeah, and I had forgotten that QuickTime was emerging. And so you mentioned that as far as embedding the video, that was another sort of quote unquote game changer for having those kind of play, especially in some certain specific situations that we'll talk about with the section we played. That I forgot was sort of like a bit mind bending when they happened. For instance, the pool, the message that plays in the pool of water section, which is from the father figure.
I didn't find that yet.
Oh, okay.
I don't think. Did I find that?
Well, so there's I guess you don't have to do it. No, I guess you don't have to. Yeah, maybe you don't have to. Maybe it's just, and if I'm thinking about it, it might just be a story element. Because you find that note on the ground, we're jumping ahead.
Yeah, Catherine, yeah.
Yeah, and then if you plug that into the thing, then it'll play a little video. But it's tilted in the orientation and of the pool, so it's pretty immersive for the time. But your earlier point on sort of the OEM aspect, the thing I wanted to mention there, and with a tiny bit of personal history with this game myself before I got into the industry, everybody, like, so PCs were getting big as far as like something that a lot of people were starting to have in their house, right? And we're talking about a broad audience. So, your parents were starting to buy stuff. They're getting more affordable. More and more people had them in their home for various, usually application reasons or educational reasons, or just like it was just becoming a common thing. And so because of the OEM thing, my memory is that, a lot of non-gamers ended up having a copy of MYST just by default, because it came with everything. And to Brett's point, the secret weapon for them was the trick of the eye that the rendering actually shows. And so when you have this new computer that you bought at Gateway or whatever it was, Gateway's probably later than that.
No, mine was a Gateway actually.
Was it? Okay, yeah. So Gateway or HP or any of those early companies that were really Dell, right? Early Dell, probably. And so when you have someone come over and say, "Hey, look at my new PC," you're going to fire up MYST and you're going to show it to them, and they're going to see these rendered, 2D cards that are rendered in 3D, and it blows people's minds. Because they're like, "Wow, that's amazing! I can't believe it. I need to go get a CD-ROM so I can do the same thing." And it was very clever for, and I think Seventh Guest was the other one that was a common OEM, or at least one of those sort of killer apps that people would play. And the other one that I remember that was for a different reason that I think we maybe briefly mentioned on the TIE Fighter series is Rebel Assault, which was the LucasArts version of a CD-ROM hit, quote unquote. And that was a combination of sort of the what was the name of the engine that they used for that?
Darn it. It was iMuse was the music.
Slipped my mind. You know what I'm talking about, though.
I do. Yeah,
the on-rail sort of shooter aspect of it, but they also played video movies from the actual original classic trilogy, and so that was another thing of like, hey, look at this game playing scenes from the films on my PC. So it was all because of CD-ROM, as Brett said. But MYST was definitely that one. And my quick personal history to it is before the last sort of out of games job that I had was in retail. Before I got into LucasArts was in retail, and I was working at a educational gift store of sorts, and they had a computer section, and I kind of was the retail person for the computer section, and MYST would just fly off the shelves because of that same reason, because people wanted something new and shiny to play on their, the PC they just bought. So it was definitely a story of timing and kind of riding a particular wave at that right time. It
did start with an I. I thought I was crazy thinking that. I was like, it's not iMuse. It was Insane, the Insane engine.
Great, right. Of course. Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, and just it's sort of like what is an equivalent, I guess, to be super cheesy about it. And an equivalent today is Fortnite in a way, right? Because in my vague memory, I feel like everyone knew what MYST was.
Oh,
you know what I mean? My mom knew what MYST was.
Yeah, my parents did as well. In fact, my father played Seventh Guest. I don't know whether he played. We played Seventh Guest a fair amount together. I don't know if he ever played any MYST. I don't recall, but they definitely saw it. Yeah, they knew it was, and they were, it was a thing that I showed them. Like, look at this.
Yeah,
can you believe this?
Exactly
like you describe. So yeah, for sure.
And then I think the irony is that most people would walk around that initial island and pretty much never go any further,
right?
Because it was so hard for most people, and just had a lot of ways to get stuck, which we'll talk more about.
Yes.
But it's a very interesting. I don't know if it's worthy of sort of a sea change, but I think it is. It really changed. Especially, I think it's really especially important that we talk about, like we kind of mentioned earlier, talk about all the different other adventure games coming out at the same time that started to have a certain formula, right? And then you look at those, especially the art style that they were starting to be limited by in the more, graphical, artistic versions of their games and world rendering. And then you compare it to these two games, and people in a way don't even understand how it's coming out of the same machine, if you're not really aware of how it's built. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can remember. I mean, MYST clones were a thing for a number of years. MYST clones and Doom clones.
Yep.
It was definitely a thing. I can remember one called like the Lighthouse, something like that. In particular, being in the same vein, there was definitely a big. I mean, with this kind of level of success, there were a lot of people who were trying to cash in, but none of those games really stuck. Because MYST it's a fairly decent game. I mean, there's a compelling story, and it's got a lot of, as it were, mystery. So it's very you definitely want to figure out what's going on, and that's that really pulls you forward. And I think other games, although I do remember the Lighthouse being reviewed fairly well, or Lighthouse, whatever it was called. It was. The first in this wave of games, and arguably the best, of any that came after. Although the Seventh Guest is also quite good. So, Seventh Guest made even more use of video. Here, they're using video in such a limited way, like it's always in such a small window, just because to stream video at rates, interactive rates, was not easy at the time, and because disk access was very, very slow, so you actually had to make your movies small or blurry. You could blow up the space that you were filling, but I guess I don't even know how that would work, but at the time. But yeah, you can definitely see them constrained by some limitations that had more to do with how fast computers were and less by their imagination, but they used them really, really well. Those constraints, I think, helped make it pretty special, with the movies in the linking books, and the when you'll go up and down in an elevator or something like that. I mean, it's like you're there because they're playing a little movie behind the 3D model, through a stencil or whatever. Pretty neat stuff for the time.
Well, yeah, and even, I mean, to your point, like even the transitions from screen to screen, if you don't have it on the sort of the zippy faster speed, that really gave people the impression that it wasn't, two-dimensional.
Right.
And so and I guess that's probably is that a feature in HyperCard, or how are they doing the transitions?
They were just, they just had regions where you could click, and then they cross. I've been playing the zippy version, but I'm pretty sure they just cross-cut the images. And that would have been just a HyperCard feature. Just a transition, an image transition, really. The sort of thing that you could, do. And I mean, we can do it at runtime, and it's in when you're streaming and stuff like that these days. It's computers are plenty fast now, but at the time, that would have looked pretty fancy. So,
well, an interesting, I think, connection point to some other things we talked about around this era, and it probably came up. I don't remember when it first came up, but we were starting to talk about 3D modeling, remember, specifically with how the characters in Dark Forces, even though they were sprites, how the models were built in 3D and then rendered out in frames, right? Or even just the cover of Dark Forces, right, being this highly rendered, high poly, three-dimensional stormtrooper that was built by John Knoll, I believe, by John Knowles. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is that their previous game, which I remember playing vaguely as well, Manhole, which was sort of an Alice in Wonderland kind of story for kids, looked very different than this. It was a lot more two-dimensional, and they were definitely the same structure from a HyperCard perspective, moving from screen to screen. I don't remember if it had any inventory at all or not, but it was very much like that, sort of moving through the world that similar way. But because 3D art was starting to emerge at the same time as this whole thing, there was another convergence point for, in my opinion, of them realizing they can start using this three-dimensional rendering technology to make these scenes feel a lot more immersive. So the jump from Manhole to Myst is actually quite large. And in a way, you kind of have this perfect storm of all these different things emerging at the same time for this team. And then just like Brett said, good sort of economical design. But then something we'll get to as we start talking about the game some more, the structure of the game was a little bit mind-blowing as well. Now, LucasArts adventure games, as we talked about with the Day of the Tentacle, did have some nonlinearity in a way of sort of like you could do a couple different things, sometimes in a little bit different order, but generally there was sort of like a way you had to progress forward. But this game structure gives you a lot more options about how to go about doing things.
Yeah,
it also makes it
at least
harder.
From the outset. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it harder because you're not always sure kind of which thing you need to do when. But I do remember sort of its, for lack of a better term, open worldiness, being something that people would mention. Because adventure games were, especially some of the very story heavy ones were generally a little more linear. So what direction did you go? What did we were talking about in pre-show that kind of dawned on us at some point that you could do any of the sections in any order if you wanted to, but I think we both did the same one. Is that right?
We did. Yeah, we both did the same one, which is, I guess it's called the Mechanical Age. It's the one that you enter via the gear that is right to the right of where you start. For me, it was just that was the first puzzle that I figured out. I was trying to figure out the tower and all of that stuff. I was trying to just figure things out. It was, I finally figured out that about the map, but I think you have to go and open the books to even have the map work. There's a bookcase with some books on it. I might be wrong about that, but I thought that's how those things appeared.
It might be, though. My impression was that it's actually based on where you've been.
Oh, okay.
Like Fog of War, like uncovering the map, but I actually don't know. It could be either one. Yeah. Which was another.
I was actually surprised. There was more reading in it than I remembered.
Yeah, me too.
I was just flipping through the pages of those books and reading more and more about the different ages, basically.
Yeah.
That you've been, and then there's that weird book that has all the puzzle things in it, all the grid.
Yeah, I think that comes in later. Yeah.
Oh, it does. Yeah, that's for the end.
Yeah. But the setup for the game was always. So when I actually reading up a little bit on the game, I actually didn't realize that at least the name was inspired by a Jules Verne book, The Mysterious Island.
Oh,
I haven't read. I don't know what that.
No, I haven't read it either.
But you can see a lot of clear influences from lots of stuff. Whatever Chronicles of Narnia is mentioned, things like that, right? Zork.
Yeah.
But that cover just was always so compelling to me because it was so beautifully rendered, and you have this figure falling from the sky, and then the game opens that way, right, where you're going through, and it really leans into sort of like Brett joked earlier, the mystery of it all, like what is going on. And so this sort of hunting and pecking kind of island where you're going around and interacting with stuff and fooling with stuff, but nobody's here, and you get these little videos from people talking to you. There's this mystery about these two brothers, and then this husband and wife, father and mother. And then there's these almost like what I want to say, like not hub rooms, but there's the library room is a bit of a hub in that you have to interact with it, and then using the map to rotate the tower, right? Then it allows you to interact with these sort of 4 different sections. So it's this interesting sort of interconnected world it was always hard for me to grok exactly what I needed to do when, because of that. But it also made it very cool because it felt like the island was very cohesive and connected, and like the island itself was like a puzzle box, and that was always a compelling aspect, as well. As a quick mention, for sort of a modern day lineage example of a similar thing, now that I just mentioned puzzle box, did you play The Room on iOS?
Oh yes, I have. Yeah, I played both of them.
Yeah, which
I think there's a third actually, but I played the first two.
Yeah, and it's obviously not an island, but this concept, I feel like there's sort of, you can feel MYST's impact on even games like that, where you take this very interconnected thing and have puzzles kind of all intertwined with a lot of mystery involved.
Yeah, that's a good pull. I actually had that thought while I was playing, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. I didn't write it down. It's those sorts of games where there's like the literal machinery. Like there's a lot of thought here as to how these things are literally interconnected. Whether it's the turning lighthouse or the different symbols that you're going to have to turn off and on at some point. I hope I can figure that puzzle out because it's been a while. There's powering up the spaceship or something. There's all these like things that you can go and do that are connected. And that's just super super neat how that all works. And yeah, and I also I thought about when I was playing this, I was wondering with Gone Home.
I was going to mention walking simulators.
Yeah, and walking simulators, whether they might find a wider audience with more casual audience if they at least had a mode where you could navigate like you can in these. Because a lot of people who don't play games because they have trouble with navigation. It's a skill to learn to hold a controller in your hands and or keyboard and mouse, even more so maybe. I showed Skyrim to my then girlfriend, and I had never seen so much of Skyrim's ceilings and floors. I think it's very difficult, and I think as players we often underestimate the degree to which that's true. That how much we have learned and just internalized, and I wonder if a mode like that in something like Gone Home would make it more appealing.
Yep.
So you'd you were in a place where there was something of interest, and you could even look around a little bit or something like that. But the actual navigation would be not something you'd have to. It'd become more like a hidden object game, for example, which are a very popular form of casual play.
Yep.
So that's another sort of style of game that's kind of similar, not exactly, but it's definitely got its roots in these sorts of games as well, I think.
No, that's an awesome point. I was looking back at my notes, and I wrote down a note about sort of the broader market impact that the game had. And then right below it, related to that note, I have a note on simple interface design that allowed for the broader market to engage with it, which is exactly what you're saying. Yeah, it was. Yeah. I think it was actually another secret weapon for the game because you could have this person, like we were saying earlier, that just bought this computer. You could have them move around the world, and it felt very cool and high poly and very exciting, but you didn't need to know a lot to do it. And my mom actually plays a lot of hidden object games on her iPad. It's like she's become a gamer, like a pretty obsessed gamer, which words I never thought I would say. But she's playing, iPad-centric games that she loves and are not ones that necessarily I would play, but it's because of some of those, those sort of simple interfaces that I think she's really drawn to it. I actually did get her to play Gorogoa, which she really loved, a whole different kind of thing, but another, I think, a good example of what you're saying when it comes to really well designed interface and usability for the platform of an iPad, because of the nature of it, but still very interesting the way that the puzzles worked in that game. So a little shout out for, I think, an excellent game.
Yeah, that's one I need to catch up with, to be honest. It's been on my list for a while.
Yeah, it's not that long.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, no, it's one I just kind of forgot about. I don't play a ton of games on the PC anymore, and that's how I would probably play that one. Unless we're playing it for the cast, I tend to play on consoles, but just because I'm at a PC all day. But
that's fair.
That's been my thing basically since I've been in the industry. It was like once I had a PS2, I kind of have not really played PC games as much. More so than those first, I don't know, half dozen years or whatever. I was still playing a lot on the PC, but I definitely am a lot less so these days.
Yeah, I wrote down Walking Simulator as well, which is that's not my favorite term for those games. I think it's not that.
Yeah, I mean,
for what's happening, but
we're people. The people who make them are taking it back, and they're like, you know what? Fine, well, that's what we'll call them. And just taking it as a badge of honor.
Yeah,
we can make walking interesting.
Own it.
So there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you're close to that, and so, but walking around, quote unquote, rocking around the island made, like Dear Esther came to mind.
Yeah, sure.
As an example, right? There's no puzzles in that game that I remember.
No, it's purely it's a very walk around and hear the audio as you go. Sort of experience. Yeah, but Proteus. Proteus is the same way. Also set on an island.
Proteus. So, I don't think I played Proteus, but
it's a kind of interesting and it's a bit lower res than Dear Esther is that's like an Unreal Engine, beautiful game, and Proteus is I
think it might have been Source actually.
I think you're right. I think it was Source. I think they remade it in Unreal.
I think they did. You're right. Yep.
Proteus is a different sort of thing. It's much more low fidelity deliberately. It's an interesting little experiment too, and one of the first ones as well.
Yeah, and I think some of it is that sense of solitude that they clearly want to go after in this game too. In fact, in some of the text in the books, they talk about that, right? Where he's sort of in his journaling, he's talking about being alone, and both that on the island and on the different ages, I guess, that we'll be going to. But the other thing that you mentioned there from as a segue is the audio. That was another aspect that I don't remember thinking back when it comes to PC technology. I guess it probably would have been the CD-ROM would have allowed us to do some of this as well, though you would have to correct me on how the streaming of that would work. But I do also remember about being blown away by the music and the ambient audio design, because it really filled in the blanks for a non-animating world, or camera, right? I mean, there were animating features when it comes to the switches and the dials and things, but generally it's pretty static. But then the audio was what filled in, because they have great wind, or you go underground and there's a lot of, you hear all the inner workings of the tower or what have you. And then the music had this almost Vangelis-esque kind of feel to it that made it just feel very kind of tranquil, but also spooky sometimes, so I just felt like, and I actually had meant to look up the composer before.
It's Robin Miller, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yes. Yep.
That's amazing.
Very talented.
Yeah, very talented. Yeah. So then I wonder, did they do the audio design too? Jeez,
they must have. Yeah,
they must have. It was just all them. But yeah, I mean, it's rare to have all of those elements come together so well, really well. We haven't gotten to, I forget what it's called, the one with all the walkways and the forest, the small forest. But I remember the ambient audio design being really good there too. It just really puts you in in the place. And so
something Chillwood, Chainwood,
channel.
something.
Oh, he mentions it in
Channelwood?
the book. I think it's channel.
Yeah, he does. I didn't
Oh
write
yeah,
down.
I see it here on the page here. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So the audio design is just stellar, and because I probably started this game and got who knows how far. I couldn't even tell you how many times, because I just would get stuck. So I mean, we can probably talk more about the specific puzzles as we go throughout the series.
Well, I mean we'll dig into that in a moment. Just to finish on the CD aspect as far as audio goes.
Oh yeah.
You could still use it just as a CD player. So effectively, there were parts of the disc that were data and in the program, but then there were tracks that were just tracks. We did that for Starfighter as well. Which was the first Starfighter was actually on a CD, even though it was on a DVD capable device. We didn't need the space of a DVD, so we went for the cheaper CDs. And then for Jedi Starfighter, we moved to DVD. I'm not sure they were still doing CD production for PlayStation 2 at that point. It was a pretty brief time, but yeah, so you could just basically put on what was called Redbook audio, which is the CD standard for audio, and you could simply play your CD player just as a plain old CD player, in order to play the music or whatever. When they did the talkies for LucasArts adventure games, I think that was how they did it there as well. I'm not entirely sure. I don't have backup on that, but I think that's true. So,
yeah, interesting. So they're literally just playing a track when that stuff's
going on. Yep,
Does
I believe so.
The ambient audio too? Do you think? Or
so the ambient audio probably not, unless it could be done in such a way that, because maybe. It depends what else is playing. Yeah, it depends what else is playing or what they need to play. So that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it's funny when we decided to play this game that I was a little bit mixed on it, because it's like I have this weird mixed feeling about this game because I did get stuck so much and was always so frustrated. And so I was like, oh yeah, we should play the game because it's MYST and it has had such a big impact on the industry and the medium. But I had this PTSD about it too. But now that I'm playing it, I'm really happy we chose it, because it really is also bringing back good memories, but also I think it's way more important than I had thought about before we started playing. You know what I mean? As we started getting into it, I really started thinking more about it, because obviously that's what we try to do on the podcast. But now I'm really realizing, this is actually a big deal. This game is.
Yeah, and I think among game developers, we didn't feel that way.
No,
it was very common for people to hate on MYST at the time, which was pretty wrong-headed considering how many CD-ROMs it put out there into homes for us to put our games on. It was not really. Say what you might have at the time about the game's design, and I think a lot of those conversations were just wrong. To be honest, I think it was really just. I think there was a degree to which it was like, "Are you kidding me? It sold 6 million units." And by comparison, Dark Forces was considered a huge hit, and it was like 750K to like 900K, somewhere in that range, under 1 million. High hundreds of thousands of units are considered a huge hit. So it's by comparison, to have this thing that is so simple compared to some of the other technical stuff that we had to do to make games work, was just people just being frustrated that we weren't as successful. So
yeah, I didn't anticipate talking about that, but I think that's a good mention for this particular game for the series, because with something like Doom coming out in the same year, right? And
right.
Being a Twitch game, right? And especially being, I guess I'll lovingly call sort of core game developers. We were chasing that, right? We were chasing real time. We were chasing Twitch sort of gaming. And this was a first-person game, right? But it was
Yep.
there was sort of the quote unquote playing a trick on the gamer about what was actually going on. It seemed a lot higher res than something like Doom, of course, when you look at it as a non-gamer. And so we were frustrated with that, and we and really didn't feel like it was sort of deserved to be in the same category as that stuff. But at the same time, it ended up being, to some degree, it's not exactly the same, but you hear similar frustrations with any game that breaks out beyond, right? Beyond the core. And even Fortnite, even though it is a core sort of shooter style game, gets flack for it today. Unfair flack, just because, right?
Yep.
It doesn't do the things that certain people want it to do. It's fascinating going back to this, though. What an interesting, unexpected game for me to play, and then coming from it's just so different from a lot of stuff we've been playing, to be honest. Looking
really
at
is.
it through different audiences' eyes. You know what I mean? Because we're always looking at it through that sort of like more hardcore gamer eyes, I think, when we're playing this stuff. And this one's not that.
So what was your experience like? I found myself covering a lot of the same ground again and again and again as I tried to figure out what to do. I was streaming it like I normally do, and I was like, oh boy, this is gonna be a long afternoon if I can't get a hold of something at some point. I was trying to find a foothold, and then I found the tower. That was something I had entirely forgotten how that worked. So I spent a lot of time spinning my wheels there. I mean, just going in and out of the building and then going down by the water. I was like, I think you can some way to turn these dials so that you can get across there. I remember that, but I don't remember how. And then finally coming across the books in the bookshelf. And I mean, I'd already seen the films of Atris or Akinar and Cirrus, but I hadn't really gotten a toehold into anything at that point. I was really lost. I'm not even sure how to get the video of him talking to. I think he's talking to Catherine in the pool, right? I do remember that, but I couldn't figure out where to input the number. So I was missing something there. And I'm anyway. So I was totally spinning my wheels, casting mud all over the place, until I finally worked out the tower and went and did the mechanical age. What was it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, very similar as far as like a lot of backtracking and feeling like I'm lost or not sure. That's the one criticism that I've always had about the game, is that the tricky we must have talked about this. I'm almost positive we talked about this with Day of the Tentacle, but the tricky thing about puzzle games and adventure games like this is sort of like when you have a lot of things at your disposal, and you have access to a lot of different things that you can interact with. You're going to make up sort of mini narratives in your head about what they're for. And they may or may not have anything to do with what you think they do. And because of the structure of this game, you're going to find a switch or a dial or something in some room because they allow you to go in there, and you're going to try to connect it to things because you want it to work.
Right.
And that's my failing. That's my weakness, is that I will start trying to connect things too quickly because I want to move quickly, that have nothing to do with each other. So I end up just so I have to calm myself down. I have to kind of like retrace my steps. And like you said, go back and forth. So that's a frustration, because it's neat that the structure is kind of so open. But it's also very tricky to design a game that way, in my opinion. Not that I have done it that ever, so I can't be that, I can't say I've done any better, but you have to be really careful with what you give the player access to, because they're just gonna, they're gonna find false connections, essentially. The one on the positive, one thing that I in this playthrough that I did really enjoy. And now I think it's going to help us get a better foothold, is once you do find the tower and you realize that you can control the tower, and that once you go up the tower, you get essentially sort of the quote unquote key, right, for that particular age or puzzle string, right? Mm-hmm. And once you've done that once, you kind of start getting the pattern, right?
Right.
Of like, okay, now I got to go. Now we finished the mechanical age or whatever it's called. Now we know we probably have to go back to the tower, turn it, look at the key, go over to that place, use whatever the number the key had, you know, in a nearby building. It's probably going to be a different sequence than the other one, so it's not like you can get it wrong. But until you get some of these sort of like repeatable like formulas that they have, you really are just like, what do I do?
Right.
It's too much.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a pixel hunty aspect to it as well.
Oh, yeah.
We just got to find the region on the screen that's activatable. I got very lucky on the mechanical age, in the main building, of clicking on the space behind the throne that leads you into the little secret room where the page is.
Yeah.
And I totally did that by accident. I mean, once I did it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. But before that I was a little lost. And there is sometimes some somewhat spurious interactivity that is also kind of strange, like the little red, yellow, and green light in that room.
Yeah.
Don't have any apparent function. I don't remember them having a function.
So. No, it's red herring.
No. Yeah, it's just there to give you a thing to do, like the wind-up boxes or something like that, and the bird and all that. They're just there to enliven the place, which is good, I think. But it does make you wonder at that point of like, what can you do? And it also, one thing I particularly liked about that mechanical island was that there was a real-time puzzle, or a real-time interaction, which was the first time you had that. There hadn't previously been anything that required you to act in real time. I thought that was really kind of cool.
And full admission.
Did you get stuck on that?
I did. I looked that one up. I was like, what?
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I remember it once.
I didn't look up anything, actually.
Good for you. That's awesome. Yeah.
I did it in about a couple hours.
It's a feat. Was anyone on the stream? Has anyone on the stream played it, or were they all?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there was somebody who was like trying to give me hints. I kept saying, "Look, I don't want any hints. I'm trying to experience this because I'm talking about it on a podcast. I'm trying to do it in such a way that it replicates my original experience as closely as I can."
Yeah.
And that I have all the frustrations as well, because if you make all the frustrations go away, then I can't really talk about it honestly.
Yeah.
So it's important to me to play it that way. I am sure there will come a time where I get stuck, and we can talk about. I can remember a very specific place I got stuck when I originally played it as well. So. We can talk about that. I think I actually used some hints the first time I played it, to be honest.
I'm pretty sure I did too. Yeah, I must have, because like I said, I started it and stopped it so many times. But the real time nature of that elevator puzzle, I think, is a good example of them thinking outside the box. But again, the trickiness there is you're introducing a new. I don't know if this is why, but that could have been why it got stuck, because you're introducing a new sort of mechanic or idea, right? That it just wasn't occurring to me because there wasn't anything. And, I think we've talked about this before, and it is something that LucasArts typically did, I think, a better job at, is they would introduce you to concepts, right? And then they would use those concepts in different ways. So you were already at least knowledgeable about what you could do in the world, and then they would repeat that. So in here,
I mean, how I stumbled on it was I happened to look up in the room outside of the elevator at the top.
Oh, okay.
And if you look up, you can see the levers up there.
Okay, yeah.
So that's how I went. Oh. Yeah. When the elevator goes down, that's why there's a middle stop. I just totally, I Yeah, it took me a bit to get it. I kept going up. I'm like, there's got to be something up here. I'm totally lost. What am I doing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And then I happened to click near the top of the screen. Again, that sort of like pixel hunty aspect is like, oh, I didn't think to click at the top of the screen. But that made me look up and see and make the connection of, oh, of course, there must be something here. Mm-hmm. So that was a good moment, because that is those aha moments are what keep you going in adventure games. I think often it's sort of like programming, in that programming is an endless amount of frustration.
The endless puzzle game.
Yeah, that just occasionally amounts in comes to a small win, and what you have to be so sustained by those small wins that you can keep doing it as a profession. It's like you're banging your head against the wall, and people are like, "Why would you bang your head against the wall?" And you're like, "Because it feels so good when you stop." And that's what programming and adventure games are like.
Wow. That's good. Well said. That's got to be sort of the title of your book someday.
Maybe. Beating my head against the wall. 30 years in the game industry.
Because it feels so good when I stop.
Because it feels so good when I stop. And maybe that's the title.
I think that's the title. Please write that book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I have to remember about this game, and I think what you just said reminds me of it, and is a really, really good example, is that the answer's there someplace. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What they basically have done, because of the structure of the game, because it's sort of has so many nonlinear aspects and it's so open, they've also peppered all of the clues all over the place. Yeah. So they're there, you just gotta, and the pixel huntiness of it, like there's even some hallways and some turns where you could easily miss it, right? And it's actually where you need to go. And so I remember that being a frustrating moment in the moments in the past too. I think I have a vague enough memory of things as far as like the layout that I haven't had too much of that happen yet. It's weird coming back to this so many years later, because I have these vague, my worry is I have these vague memories of places that I think are the answer, but probably were just places where I got stuck. So I think I'm going to get stuck at the same places again, because I have this memory of like, oh yeah, now I need to go there. But really, that's what I did last time, and I shouldn't.
Yeah, you've made a groove in your brain that is going to make, because you did it so many times before. Yeah. You're going to have literal ruts in your brain that take you down the same dead ends.
I've retconned how the game puzzles work.
Yes,
because it must work this way because it's what I did before. But it's like, again, that's one of my weaknesses. Is I want it, I put two and two together and get something that I shouldn't. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to play through this. We'll probably do 3 sessions would be fine.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that next time we play Two Ages, and talk about Two Ages. Either I say we just see what you come up with and not worry about. We'll have at least one that overlaps. If for some reason we don't do the same two, and then the final session we'll just do one age, and then we'll have to do our pillars and everything. So it'll be good to have a little bit less here on the bookends of the cast or of the series. So but fun to get back to it.
We'll have to look into some guests. Maybe we can get lucky with that too. Start doing some research on that.
Yeah, they're in your neck of the woods, I believe. So.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
all right.
A good start. So you want to take a break or go right into letters, or what do you think?
We can go straight into them. We only have 3, so it probably won't take too long. Again, you can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. Of course, since we're just starting a new series, we've got a few letters about Devil May Cry, our series on that we finished up last week. You, sir, have the first one.
All right. Subject Devil May Cry from Blarg42.
Probably his real name.
Yep, definitely, especially the 42 part. Greetings to you, Brett and Tim, and thanks for choosing to play DMC1, one of my all-time favorite action games. Once I noticed your good choice, I knew I had to write you another email. Unfortunately, I listened to the episode slightly later than I wanted to, and was going to warn you to stock up on yellow orbs and green stars before Mission 17, the one that ends with the third Virgil battle. But I guess you got through it just fine anyway, or one of you at least. Anyway, to this day, I can still remember vividly my first encounter with Devil May Cry at the age of 12 or 13. Me and my friend went together to buy the game, which we knew almost nothing about except how cool it looked and its intriguing name. We then went home to his place and started playing and didn't really stop for a while. Officially, my visit was supposed to be a sleepover, quote unquote, but in fact, there was very little sleeping involved, and as we played DMC through the night and somehow managed to finish it before sunrise. Holy cow. I'll never forget that crazy night. Us two sitting on his bed playing this amazing game while his mother and sisters were all sleeping in the next room, which of course meant we had to drop the volume to near mute levels. A pretty strange way to play the game as loud as this one. It was totally worth it, though, as both DMC 1 and 3 remain some of my favorite action games to this day. My question, though, is about ability upgrades and items and balancing their value. In DMC, I find it quite interesting how the developers have chosen to value the different abilities, with the double jump, for example, costing quite a few more red orbs than many of the pure damage abilities, despite seeming like a fairly basic low-level skill. But given the game's focus on quick movement and evasion, it actually makes sense. Obviously, in more stat-based games like RPGs or strategy games, there's often an obvious correlation between damage values / unit strength and resource cost. But in a game like DMC, the values of skills and items like blue, yellow orbs, holy water, etc. seem more difficult to judge. Do you think the designers have the cost of skills in mind from the start, or do they perhaps decide them later after realizing their value in the game through playtesting? Or maybe it's the other way around, that they have values fixed at some level and then buff or nerf the abilities to match. I'm not sure if you guys have actual experience with this sort of stuff, but I imagine Brett might have some insight after working on Skyrim with its skill trees and such. Anyway, thanks again for your awesome show, and hope Tim gives the game another shot. It's definitely worth it to see the madcap ending. Winky face. Yeah, I might go back to it. I do regret not finishing. I have some things I want to try against the Nightmare next time I play, if I ever do, too. Had some
Tanya,
thoughts.
just go back and watch my stream and just do whatever I did.
Well, I need to switch to the other sword, I think, and try that out.
Yeah. There's a lot of reach to that as well. It's very long. In terms of balancing, I mean, I'd be surprised if they sort of fix those numbers to begin with. But I don't really know how I would necessarily approach it. I think it's very mathematical to do the Skyrim one. There's a lot of sort of balancing against other systems that are in the game. This one's a lot less of that, since you're just getting the blood orbs that you're going to pick up as you run around and kill things and all that stuff. And it's possible, of course, to simply grind for that as well, which I mentioned I did. So it's a little different in that regard. So I'm not sure how I would take that on. I think if I had my if I were to do it myself as an engineer, what I'd probably do is set the economy a certain way, see what everybody's buying first, and probably make that a little more expensive, and then just iterate and just like keep tweaking the numbers, making sure that there's enough stuff dropping in the game that you can buy stuff, but not so much that it's easy to buy everything, so that you're constantly having that sort of decision point of, okay, I can either buy this or that, and raising and lowering prices based on what people clearly think is better. That's probably how I would approach it, which basically means lots of play testing. I would try to automate a lot of the data gathering, but especially these days. But that's probably how I would approach it. How about you, sir?
Yeah, I first of all, I from my limited interactions with, because I didn't obviously buy everything or whatever, but from some of the few things I did buy, I don't think they nailed it when it comes to their resource costs. I do think things were fairly out of whack in some cases. As an example, the blue orbs alone, as you started getting more and more of them, and they go up in value, up in cost. Um, Having a little bit extra health actually in this game doesn't do that much for you. So,
Hmm.
I think they did apply some math there, just from a logic standpoint, but didn't really back it up with what if it was really what they needed to do. So that's just a quick statement. But yeah, I think my approach slash our approach often comes from really maybe the former of his guesses in that we generally start with sort of, at least if I think about it from a systematic approach, we start with what kinds of verbs do we want to go after first? Like, what are the things we want them to do? And we won't start with fixing the economy. We will start with what we want the player to be able to do, and then we will start, experimenting and guessing at some of the value of that stuff. It definitely involves a lot of playtesting, and then there does become a little bit of a circular sort of tuning thing that will happen there, in that you have the things that you think will be fun for people, and then you put in your guesses, and then you would then actually tune in both directions, potentially both the
Yeah.
cost but also the behavior.
Yeah.
You probably will
Yeah.
always
Good
want the
point.
verb to be there, like a double jump, or like a super, fire fist or whatever that the gloves had, or something like that. But you'll actually be touching both of them depending on how playtesting's going and such. So start with that foundation, but then it really becomes like back and forth, to be honest.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot lately. I mean, I think part of why I answered this question the way I do is because I've been thinking a lot about that for the game I'm working on.
Oh yeah,
Not
cool.
because of economy specifically, but thinking about, okay, if we put this out to a small group of players, what good data can we get from them, and how, and
Mm-hmm.
how can we use that to inform the game, and also even just doing randomized testing. The game I'm working on is going to be something that I can probably write bots for pretty simply, that I just want to be running all the time and seeing what interesting things come out of it, and trying to figure out how to get that data from sort of, to get the interesting stuff from a lot of data. And so I guess that's partly why I think along those terms at this very moment. But yeah, I like a lot of what you say. There's definitely a lot that goes into tuning those numbers off of a sort of primary guess. You kind of go with your gut, I think, a little bit. You are sort of dangling those things out in front of the player, and roughly how many blood orbs or whatever they're going to have when they make their first decision, and so you want to maybe push forward the things that you'd really like for them to look at that point and things like that. So also, since the game involves a lot of failure, that there was often cases where I was buying different things, so there's also some experimentation the player can do in that particular case. So,
Mm-hmm.
but an interesting question for sure.
Yeah.
I have one here from Daniel C. If that is his real name. Saved by achievement hunting. He says, "Hi there. Listening to the podcast is making me feel real good about chasing the never use a yellow orb achievement. I figured I was making things more difficult when I played the HD trilogy for the first time a couple months ago, but I think restarting my game and replaying the level with all my used items returned and all my orbs ready to be respent was more a crutch than a punishment. I think this is the first time an arbitrary limitation actually made a game easier for me. But yeah, Nightmare was no joke. Thankfully, Holy Water was way better for bosses than I had imagined. Instantly knocking off about a third of troublesome bosses' health bar was a real treat after a restart. Struggling through DMC1 and sleepwalking through DMC2 did make the third game all the better, though. It's a huge improvement, even for folk like me who are pretty bad at this style of action game. Hopefully playing DMC5 gives a similar impression for you two, and I'm looking forward to checking it out myself once I finish the fourth game and reboot. I should say. Love the show, Daniel. Yeah. This is a sort of touches on something I think we talked about last time, about how sometimes having to replay and really get to know, I think this was from listener feedback as well, to really get to learn the skills to play the quote unquote right way, I think is how the email put it. Even though it's a term that you, it's not something we like to think of in those terms normally, that there's not a right way. But yeah, I mean, to get to that skill level, sometimes just not being able to use the yellow orbs is kind of interesting. that would actually force you to get good, as it were. It's a kind of interesting take.
Yeah, what he was also kind of alluding to the sort of erosion of resources if you do use them, right? Was I getting that from his mail, or we talked about that some, right? Where even if you use the resource, you don't get your other resources back.
Yeah.
So right. In a way, it's like, sure, you restarted, but you're kind of, in a way, the only thing you possibly get from it, because you're losing resources, if you use them, is kind of more practice. You know what I mean? At it, but you could technically get the same practice by just restarting.
Not using the yellow orbs.
Yeah, by not using. So, yeah, it's right. It's funny. It's an interesting case study. I gotta say, to keep an eye on. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but although I don't know what they do in 5. I didn't use any of the. Do they even have? Oh no, I did. I used.
There's a yellow orb.
The dime. What's it called? It's a diamond or something, right? Or a.
Oh, the golden orb.
Golden orb, right? I used it on that one boss with the fire belly.
Yeah, me too. Same
I didn't see what my resources did. They probably didn't come back. Anyway, yeah. So I have the last mail here.
Yep, that's the last one.
DMC notes from Ben Zaug. Zaug.
Yeah, Zaug.
Never sure. Friend of the cast. So I collected a few notes for DMC 5 bonus episode. Good, because we don't know what's going on. Nero is introduced in DMC 4. He has a demon arm. Okay. I'm having some Metal Gear flashbacks, which you saw removed in DMC 5, that basically functions like the grapple in DMC 5. Okay. So that was a flashback, right? Don, number 2.
He's explaining that he has the basically in DMC4 there was also the grapple mechanic, because he had this demon arm that let him do it.
Oh, got it. Because
the demon arm's been cut off.
That came back to take his arm back. Yeah. In that flashback. Yeah. Okay. Number 2, Dante's different styles were introduced in DMC3. Trickster, which was agility dash, swordmaster, gunslinger, royal guard, being defensive. Number 3, Ifrit lets you hold down the attack button and charge each hit. Whoops, didn't know that. My first playthrough in 2001, I didn't understand how good Ifrit was. Once you do, it deals a heavy amount of damage and the cost of speed.
It's probably at the cost of speed.
Speed. You basically get the choice of power or speed, but when you've been building up your sword, it's tough to want to switch. Yes, that's the key there. Number 4, Brett in DMC 5 chapter 17-ish. Feel free to skip this very minor spoiler if you aren't there yet. Do you want to skip this?
That's fine. I've read the email, yeah.
Okay. There's a spoiler for other people.
Spoilers don't bother me, but yeah, skip ahead 30 seconds if it bothers you.
Yeah. So we're about to spoil a little bit there for the listeners. There's a reference to Virgil being Nello Angelo in DMC 1 spoken out loud. Not sure if you've gotten that far, but definitely confirms a theory started from when you get the other half of the pendant.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, because I mentioned that same thing, right? Because
yes, exactly.
Because you put the
Two
pendant
halves together. Yeah.
You hear their mom say something, and I think she says Virgil and Dante's name in the dream sequence or whatever.
Right.
In the memory. And then 5, there's not another DMC where you bounce between characters like DMC 5. In DMC 2, you can play as one of 2 characters that each has a whole campaign. In DMC 4, you play the first half as Nero, then basically the back half does a backwards trek of the first half, but as Dante. Wow, that's tricky. That's some good game development there. Yeah, but even in 5, though, I see what you mean. Just bounce. So it's not a bouncing back and forth. You don't get to choose in 5, but you do go back and forth. I see.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben from Iowa. Zaug.
Yeah, I want to say that we were the first to do that, bouncing back and forth between characters. I think that's probably not true, but
no, that's definitely can't be true. But
no, I can't imagine
that's true. About Starfighter?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I remember I had to really fight Darren about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was my idea. My idea and Wayne Klein's idea was that you'd play the 3 different characters. And Darren's like, "Don't you think that's going to be confusing for the player?" I'm like, "What could be more Star Wars than jumping back and forth between 3 different characters who are all going to kind of end up at the same place at the end?" I mean, it's like that's how these movies work. And that was the thing that converted him. So
good work, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyway, thanks for those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love to hear from listeners. We also love to get reviews now and again, and it would be great if you could find your way over to the podcast app and throw us a review if you haven't in the past. If you have, thank you. Maybe just tell a friend about our podcast. Anyway, so next time we're going to play 2 more ages, whichever 2 we can figure out how to get to and through. So that we'll see how that goes, and we'll spend the most time on whichever one we have in common, unless we have both in common, in which case we'll just dive into both. I'm sure there'll be some interesting stuff that comes up from that. I guess that's about all for us. You can find the podcast online at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And, of course, you can find me streaming on Twitch, twitch.tv/BrettDuville. The first 4 nights of the week, Monday through Thursday, I play whatever I feel like playing. At the moment, I'm playing Resistance 3 for the PS3 by Insomniac.
It's always fun for me to hear. I mean, it's almost like a new little thing for me where I get to, what is he going to play this week? It's like, it's just such an eclectic, weird mix. Jack and Daxter to Resident Evil or Resistance 3. How did you pick? Why?
I recently bought a bunch of PS3 games that I was like, oh yeah, I should play that. And I'm just kind of making my way through. I mean, because you pick up a PS3 game for like, $5 or $10 these days. And there were a number that I was like, oh yeah, I meant to check that out and never did. And so now I'm filling in some gaps. I have games from my collection for the PS3 I haven't played either. So I've got a ton of them down there. Right. Stuff that I probably bought new and in some cases probably are still in the plastic. So that's a fun thing.
In 10 years, we're going to have the same conversation and it's going to be, I don't know.
The PS4.
Devil May Cry 5.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I thought I'd go back to this one to start over, but no, that's what I'm playing on there right now. That one should go pretty quick. We'll see. It'll be something different next week, I'm sure, because it's not a long game.
Yeah.
It's a first-person shooter campaign, so it'll be 10 hours. But yeah, you can come by. We just kind of hang out and chat and talk about whatever is on people's minds. So cool. Come by and enjoy it. On the weekends, of course, I play whatever we're playing for the cast, and usually for kind of longer sessions because I'm trying to get through a whole big chunk of game. That might not be as involved this weekend because we're playing MYST, which is we'll see. It depends on how stuck I get. So usually you can see me failing, things like that. Playing Devil May Cry on stream was often quite embarrassing. Died 30 times in a row.
Yeah.
It's just like, sorry that I'm so bad at games.
that extra pressure, I just don't know if I will ever be a streamer.
Yeah.
It just adds another layer that I already have.
It does, but it's very fun to, to have a crew of people that you are getting to know and who are coming by, a few days a week or whatever. And, you're just getting to know people. So shout outs to Irreverent Q and Moss, OLG, numerous others, Brian, Don't Kick Food, Gothic Chocobo, Biostats, tons and tons of folks who come by on a fairly regular basis. McKendy too, actually, our friend from Houston. So love to see all of you folks there. Sorry if I missed anybody, but it's a blast. Anyway, that's all we have for tonight. Have fun playing games this week, and good night.
Good night.